So welcome to our Flipping for Flipped Classroom webinar today. Today I am joined by high school math teacher Corey Lovelace, who teaches math over in West Fargo. So we used to teach together, but now sadly I don't get to see him very often. So I'm very excited to share his knowledge and his energy with you today as a math teacher who has completely flipped his classroom. Is that accurate, Corey? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, except for my remedial classes, I teach a couple remedial courses that I don't do the flipped classroom in, but for all my core classes, Algebra 1 and AB Calculus, I do those both flipped.
Great. So he's our on-site expert. I'm a flipped convert, and I know Julie is here also with English. I think English and social studies, all of us already use some of the components of flipped classroom, of having students look at material. I always said if I have a student read a chapter of a book, and then the next day we're manipulating and we're playing with and we're going through that content, that's a similar philosophy to flipped classroom. But the flipped helps you take it a little bit further. So the main objectives today are pretty straightforward. We are going to review the main tenets of flipped classroom, but quickly. I'm kind of assuming that we're all at least somewhat familiar with at least the idea of flipped classroom. So feel free to slow me down, shout out questions. We did a nice little quick mic check so I can hear all of you. So feel free to jump in and interrupt, ask me, ask Corey a question. But we want to get to the main part of this, which is an overview, a tutorial on how to use Edpuzzle and Screencast-o-matic, so that when you do decide to start trying the flip, either for a lesson, a unit, or eventually your whole class, you have the tools to make it as easy as possible for you and for your students. So as we get in, so just a little reminder about flipped classroom. The main gist of flipped classroom, right? You're delivering instructional content outside of the classroom. So instead of your traditional lecture of explaining your lesson in front of the board, students watch that lesson outside of class, and then the bulk of class time is spent on applying that knowledge. So you take out some of the lecture for yourself, and why I think flipped classroom is so cool is it gives you, the teacher, the time to do the thing that at least I liked doing more, and that was actually working with students. Hearing them talk about their understanding, seeing them apply their learning to what we were doing in the classroom, and this helps free up the time for that. So there are lots of different reasons to do flipped. Certainly, it helps you differentiate. We're going to be talking about differentiation a lot throughout this little webinar. I think one of the main reasons to flip is so that you can differentiate your instruction, push those upper level learners, support those students who need a little bit more remediation, but keep everyone moving forward. That will also mean we'll be talking about formative assessments, and that's one of the reasons why I like Edpuzzle. The other side benefit for flipping is you automatically have review material for your students, and you automatically are able to share what's happening in your classroom with parents. So you get to spend more time with students, but there are also those other benefits. Oh, I apologize. This wants to go to the website. So the general goal here, students are going to prep, then in class we're going to work, and then they get to apply their learning. So overall, just a more active, interactive experience in the classroom. So I liked this quote: think about what you want to do with that time. If you're going to have, let's say, 50% more time where kids are actively engaged in doing things in your class, I think we can shift to think about not just project-based learning, but product-based learning. That by doing this approach, we're able to shift that it's not just about filling out worksheets or answering the questions, that we can really start scaffolding students' learning to being applying and producing something in their learning time. So your first step, and I think there's a step up here that's even more important. The first step is to accept the fact that you're not going to do all of this immediately. I think frequently we as teachers hold ourselves to very high standards, and we beat ourselves up if something doesn't go perfectly, if we're not able to execute immediately. So that's a really hard thing to let go of. But anytime you're trying something new, I really encourage you to, as much as you can, let go of that. Hopefully today will give you the tools to make this process easier, but start small. Start with something that would be most helpful for you and your students to flip, and just try one thing at a time. You do, as always, you start with your standards. You want to make sure that you're connecting, that what you're doing is connecting to what you want your student outcomes to be. You want to make sure you're thinking about your in-class activities. So it's not just about creating the video and having that out there, but by creating that video and freeing up your in-class lecture time, what other hands-on activities are you going to put into that previous lecture time? It will also be helpful if you take a few minutes to teach students how to watch videos. That sounds pretty silly, but because we assume that students in this day and age know everything there is to know about watching videos. And it's true that media is ubiquitous for these kids and they're very tech savvy, but they're not necessarily tech conscious of the best ways to watch something in order to specifically learn from it, not as an entertainment module. So there are some nice videos online, but a lot of it is just doing the first flipped lesson still in class. So you show them the video and you talk about how you as a learner experience a video process. This was my favorite tip, and I think it just makes sense. If you think for your flip, think of Bloom's taxonomy. You want that higher order thinking that you do in Bloom's, our goal as teachers, where we want students to get. That's what you're doing in class. The lower portion of Bloom's taxonomy, where they're receiving information, receiving facts, learning the basic process, that's perfect stuff to flip. You can give them that content in a video or find a video that covers that content. And then that way you can focus on scaffolding them up the hierarchy and getting them into those more application and analysis steps. Corey, would you agree with that? Is that what you have found to be helpful when you're deciding what do I flip and how do I flip?
Yeah, absolutely. So I teach high school math for those of you who just joined in. I teach grades 9 through 12. So that means that I teach anything from algebra to calculus. And so for my algebra students, for example, a video that I would put on as homework for an evening would be something along the lines of an algorithm for factoring. So I would teach them to look for factors and multiply be a number, add to be another number, and I would give them the instructions or the steps on how to do a problem in this video. But when they come to class, that's when I have the opportunity to have students have a discussion about what they've learned or what they've seen, and also to be more creative. Like maybe you get to design a problem to be factored by your partner or vice versa. You can kind of take the extra time you have in class, not explaining, to do something more fun or more engaging.
Right. And we'll talk a bit more continuously about how Corey is managing that. So a couple more tips from what I've read from a pedagogical standpoint. The experts say about 1.5 minutes of video per grade level. So as you're getting into 10th grade, they can start to handle 15-minute videos, but the younger your students are, the shorter your videos should be. Really, and if you think about it, that 5 to 10-minute length is kind of the sweet spot. So if you have to choose, probably better to do 2 shorter videos and have students watch both of them than one longer video. That's also honestly easier for you because you'll screw up at some point in time and that will stress you out. And so if you're doing 2 shorter videos, that's going to be a little bit easier to bite. And then it will also be easier for your students. So I encourage you to start small for yourself, but also for your students. So let's hop over to Edpuzzle because this is just a super cool tool. I'm going to give you a quick tour and then I'm going to throw it over to Corey and he's going to show you some of the analytics. So when you come to Edpuzzle and hopefully, give me a thumbs up or something in the chat box, you should be able to see my Edpuzzle screen. You can see along your top toolbar, I have my classes. So you can add your different classes, your different math classes, your different sections of things. I've got 2 students hanging out in our demo class. Here, when you're in your classes, you can see the people who are in your class book, and in this class, you can reset their password, you can remove them, things like that. Hopefully you're noticing this import from Google Schools button. So I know that Julie down in Colfax, I know you're a Google school. So this is part of the reason why I love Edpuzzle. If you're already set up on Google Classroom, you can import your classes directly from Google Classroom. If you're not set up on Google Classroom, those of you who logged in, I sent you the link and you clicked on it. Was it much more difficult to sign in as a student? Are Shannon or Steph willing to comment on how arduous it was to sign in as a student?
It was easy.
Okay. Well done. That was well choreographed. I need to send you each your check for doing that in perfect unison. So you have your class, you can invite more students, and this is where I got this link. So I can email that out directly. I can also post it to my Google Classroom if for some reason I need them to see it there. I can choose my class and publish that link there. So pretty easy to import your students. That's the main thing. There's a gradebook feature that I haven't imported yet because I don't really have a reason to, but you can keep track of your grades right here. That may or may not be a time saver for you. I don't know. Would depend on how easy it is to transport that stuff over. This is your assignment dashboard for your class, so it shows you what's in progress and what's going on. And then you have your content. And this is where all of the videos that you have found or made will live so that you can then reuse them, reassign them. And here's one of the things that I love. When you have a video that you have already made, this is how easy it is to duplicate the video. So if you've made the video once, and I think this is where we get into some beautiful differentiation options. I've made this video once, but let's say I also know that I have some lower level learners who just are not going to be able, they're going to be overwhelmed by this volume of questions. And many of the questions that I embedded in this video are short answer, and I want them to have multiple choice. I can duplicate the assignment, and then I can make a different version for those different learners. Then when you go to Google Classroom, you can choose which students you want to receive which link. And that's another way that you can differentiate. But here's how easy it is. So I promised Corey, because we got into a little Oxford comma debate yesterday about is it important or not. Luckily, he agrees with me that it is important. So this is how cool it is. You can search right here in Edpuzzle. They have all of these different courses over on the side that have content, but you just put in your search word and search for the video. Then you can watch them here.
Hey, grammarians. Hey, Paige.
Hi, David.
So, we're going to talk today about the Oxford comma.
So I can decide if I want to use that video or not. If it's something that I want to use, I click use it. And now I'm in the editing panel of Edpuzzle. And again, this is how slick it is. Let's say I don't want that little hi Paige, hi, blah, blah, blah at the beginning. I need them just to get to it because my kids aren't going to watch that. You have this editing feature. Unfortunately, you can only crop from the front or the back. According to Edpuzzle, they're working on that to give you more cropping options. But you simply drag this little cursor here to where you want the video. So if I only want this very introductory chunk of the video, I can just have that chunk be my chunk of the video. Then you have the option to record your own audio track. When you do this, it will tell you you have to record over the whole thing. So if it's important to you, you can do this. I wouldn't recommend it. Other people have already done the thing. But the cool thing, you can add your own audio note. So you can record a little note to your class. So this, I think, would be really helpful if the people in the video use slightly different terminology than the terminology that you use in class. So I refer to things in this way, or I've been saying you need to work on your attention getter or your thesis. But in the video, the people call it the POW statement and the argument. So I can clarify for my students before the video starts, like they're going to call it this, but it's the same thing if that is something that's important. And then if you want to add in questions, here's where your formative assessment becomes so amazing. You put this question at the time mark in the video that you want, and then you have options to add different types of questions. So you can have an open-ended question. You've got your multiple choice question options here. And you can just have the video stop and have a comment. So you could just have the video pause and have a written comment that pops up for the students or a different prompt of something that you want them to think about. Corey made a great point that if you're using, when we were chatting yesterday, when you're making your multiple choice options, you want to make sure that you're helping figure out where their thinking is flawed. So as you make your wrong choices, making strategic wrong choices will be very helpful as you're flipping. Can you explain that a little bit more, Corey?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was designing my questions for my flipped classroom in Edpuzzle, I would always try to think of what is the most likely mistake my students are going to make. And obviously, if this is the first time you've ever taught the course, you might not be aware of what those mistakes are. But as a teacher, you kind of have a good idea where your students might stumble. And so I would purposely put in what we call obviously distractors in the multiple choice world. To make sure that if there was an opportunity for a student to make a mistake, there might be one, and I would be able to target the instruction. And when I show you some of the videos that I've made for pre-calculus, I'll show you what I mean by that. So when they make the wrong decision, I can add a comment. And you can see on Darcy's screen there on the right side where you can type the questions. If you hit the feedback switch on the bottom right hand of the box, they'll flip around. And if a student makes that decision to choose that choice, you can give them feedback like Darcy's typing, like, yes, that's great. Or if it's a common mistake that they're likely to make, you could say, oh, actually, no, this happens a lot, but you forgot to do X, Y, or Z. So it's really neat what you can do with the questions in Edpuzzle to actually give good feedback on multiple choice questions.
So this is this is the whole thing. You find your video, you can crop it, you can add your whole note. You can add as many of these question notes as you want. So you add your little tag here. I'm not sure why I'm not saving right now. And then you can keep adding questions. Once you finish, because I'll show you a finished product. It looks like this thing might have just frozen on me, of course. Once you finish, it will give you options for how you want to share this. So you can select and just share it to the whole class. You can share it to all your classes, and then it will automatically assign to those classes. This is pretty cool. You can prevent the skipping. So this means the analytics of Edpuzzle will keep track of the video, and kids can't fast forward. They can't skip ahead to the question. The video at least needs to play. And I can also tell you this, they can cheat it if they open up 2 browsers, but if they are in one browser and they click to a different tab, so let's say they're thinking, well, I'm just going to play this video, but I'm going to go and look at skateboards or whatever on this other page, look at the Tide Pod challenge for whatever reason, the video stops. The Edpuzzle video recognizes when the user has left the page and opened something else, and the video stops playing. So they have some nice built-in features to help make sure that kids are following through. And you also have the option of just sharing it with anyone. As you go through up here. I like this option. If you already use Remind in your classrooms, shoot a thumbs up in the chat box if that's something that you use. I love the idea of sharing the link, and you can throw this link to the video in Remind, hit send, and now all the kids have it to their phone. And more importantly, any parent who's already on Remind also has the link, and they know exactly what has been assigned today. So some different school systems, maybe your parents are in your Google Classroom, maybe they have access to your teacher website, so that stuff may not be necessary for some people. But if you're looking for another way to share with parents, you can do it right here. And that's everything. You can also just decide to assign later, and you don't need to do anything with it right now. So that's the basics of Edpuzzle. Do you have questions about the general, like navigation, where things are, how I found things? Does it seem, well, I'm just going to say this. The first video that I made, it took me about 5 minutes. It's very intuitive. It's very easy. And I'm going to show you one thing on our tip sheet. Down here, if you've saved this, copy a page for yourself. The link to this is in our chat box. Under the Edpuzzle resources, I want to show you one more thing. There's this amazing Chrome add-on. So you need to be in the Chrome browser. It works with Chrome browser. But what this does is it adds an Edit with Edpuzzle to YouTube for you. So I already have this saved on my Chrome browser. So anytime I go to YouTube, and you're going to see my ridiculous yoga and cat videos now. So let's say though that I decide that yes, the children need to yoga today because life is stressful. Anytime I'm on YouTube and I search for any videos, this Edit with Edpuzzle button is just there. So I can start in YouTube or I can start in Edpuzzle, whatever you're used to, by adding this extension. Once you found the video that you want in YouTube, you click on it and it will open it up in Edpuzzle for you and take you right to the editing page. And now I can edit this yoga video because that's something I would do, but I can edit this video, throw in my questions. So again, that extension is right here, Add Edpuzzle button to YouTube. It's an add-on for the Chrome browser, so you can search for it or just link to it here. I like it. There's a little subliminal message about it that I don't like, that every time I'm on YouTube, even if I am just going down a rabbit hole of watching Toto's Africa, this Edpuzzle button is here kind of reminding me, oh, like maybe you want to use this with your students, or maybe this is something that you want to save and be able to use later. So that's Edpuzzle. But I want you to see the links message. You can send the link for Google Classroom through their email. Yep. That's perfect. Thanks, Corey. So I'm going to throw it over to Corey now to present so that he can show you some of these other things, because he's got a lot of analytics in his class. So once you've made the video, so you find the video, and this is the beautiful part about using Edpuzzle, you don't have to worry about making everything. There are so many videos out there. Find a video that someone else has already created and is professional quality and ready to go. Add in your formative assessment questions, the key understandings that you want your students to have, assign them the video, and then Corey's going to show you here what the analytics look like and how you can take the analytics now and launch into your differentiated instruction in the classroom.
All right, thanks. So yeah, this is hopefully going to answer some of the questions that Julie and Jess are asking in the chat box, and feel free to ask some more, and I'll try to answer them later as I'm going along here. But as you can see, hopefully you can see my screen. If you give me a thumbs up, I'm hoping that everything looks good here, but you can see my Edpuzzle. This is a class that I made about obviously 3 years ago now, two and a half years ago, for pre-calculus. And so this is the first time I had experience sort of flipping the classroom and using Edpuzzle. And so as you can see here, I would make most of my videos, and I'm sure Darcy and I are going to talk about Screencast-o-matic later and how to make the own videos. But so I would make a video and I would upload it using the My Content button here as well. And I'll just click on one of these to show you what it looks like. So I'll watch as a student first. So these videos can be shared as long as a student is a part of your Edpuzzle classroom. And as Darcy mentioned, as I had typed earlier, they don't need to be a Google Classroom to do this. The links that you use to share students into your class, if I go here to pre-calculus members, I can, add in. I'm sorry for FERPA violation here, so hopefully don't read those names. But you can you get their usernames and their emails and send them invitations to join, just like you did at the beginning of this meeting to join Darcy's test classroom. So it definitely doesn't require the student to have any other accounts besides the one that they make for Edpuzzle using the link that you've given them. So I'll go back to watch as a student here, and you can see that I've made this video. And if I hit play here, I don't know if you could hear that at all, but you can hear me talking, and it's kind of goofy. Just on a side note, it's kind of weird to record yourself teaching for the first time, and it might feel a little strange to do that, but you get over it pretty quickly. I was pretty anxious, and so, but it's very easy to do it. And so you get to this question, and so what happens is I've had these 4 answer choices on my question, and for those math people, you'll be able to see what this is. And so I've already answered this, and students can either choose to rewatch if they got it wrong, or if they choose the wrong answer, they can get feedback from that, and I'll show you what that looks like later. But they can click rewatch or continue and go on through and proceed. So that's what it looks like for a student. I'm going to go back now and look at it from a teacher's perspective. That was this first video here, and you see on the right side of the screen, there's a due date you can assign. Obviously, the due date's passed by a couple of years, but you can see that students will be notified whether they're late or not when they do the video. The first video has some pretty great completion percentage. Now this is kind of neat. It just shows what percentage of my students have actually watched the video. And for some reason, this must have been a football game or something. I don't know. September 1st is a busy evening. Only 30% of my students have watched it. And that tells me as a teacher if I need to change what I have planned for that day. If I just go on Edpuzzle in the morning and see, oh wow, like my students haven't watched this video yet, so my classroom is going to be a little bit different than I maybe had planned. But if I click on progress here, there's a lot of great functionality in Edpuzzle to let you know whether your student had or had not watched it, and whether they watched it and answered correctly. So again, I apologize, I can't remove the names here, but hopefully none of you know these students. But you can see through here, I get analytics on how many questions they got right, whether they watched the video. If I hover over the X or the check mark, it'll tell me what percentage of the video they've watched. So I'm a bad student. So I didn't even watch any of the video. But I have other students, most of them had watched a lot of this. There's one student who watched 70% of it. And the check mark, I think, appears only when you get 100. So you can see their grade, and if it's in the red, that says that student really had trouble with the video. That means that I apparently had 3 questions here, and so this student had only answered 1 out of the 3 questions correctly. So I'm going to click on that student. And this is the really, really incredible part about Edpuzzle, is that it will show me exactly how much they've watched, how often they've watched it. They have this little temperature gauge, like if they had to rewatch a part of the video once, twice, 3 times, or even 4 times. If I go down here, I could see what they'd answered. It looks like they got the first one correct, but they got the second one incorrect. And it looks like I didn't add any feedback on these questions, but yeah, I can add feedback to the student to let them know, like, hey, if you made this choice, here's what the mistake was. And so it looks like on this third question where I'm hovering, the correct answer was down at the bottom, and they chose the answer without the hard bracket on the 4 or the -4. So that I could just message them and add a comment here and say, this was close, but remember that, remember that the -4 is included. And the student, as they go through and view their grade, can see that comment, and I can even just send it to them and they'll be notified. And so hopefully that student doesn't get an email from me 2 years later being, Mr. Lovelace, what are you doing right now? But so that's awesome. If I go back now, I could go through that student by student and see what every student had done. Now you can kind of get a quick litmus test of how many of your students need help and how many of their students are going to be bored. And so for differentiation purposes, I can see that for a majority of my students, this video went okay. I have a couple students who are kind of on the fringe, and then I have just a small group of students who really are struggling a little bit, maybe just didn't watch it carefully or had some questions. And so I could work one-on-one or in a small group of those students to figure out how I can help them perform better in that particular lesson. If I click the questions box up here, I can get analytics on every question. And so you can see that on the first question, it looks like that was the one that students performed the most poorly on, is that first question. Second question isn't far behind, but the third question they did okay. So if I'm going to reteach something, I can just look at what they struggled with and just honestly just design my day on, hey, I'm going to spend the first 10 minutes of class going over these 2 questions, make sure I have any discrepancies, and then we'll move on to whatever other activity I had planned for that day. And so you can see this is just scratching the surface of Edpuzzle's functionality. It's really neat to get these analytics, and I could see as you go, especially if your school is moving to more of a standards-based learning and you need to have targeted questions, you could get data on how many of your students understand a certain topic based on what they've answered these questions. Now, of course, it's mostly multiple choice. So you can have some free response style questions, but it's a little bit more difficult to grade, but that is possible.
Speaking of grading, how did you use the Edpuzzle videos as part of student assessment grades?
Yeah, so what I would do is I would go in and look at this video, and so I'll click on a different one here and see. I think later on I started to add more feedback in the questions. So if I go through here and I can see that a student is consistently watching all the videos but maybe struggling with the questions, and so I can maybe assign values to each of these components, where if they watch 100% of the video, maybe the homework is worth 5 points, and I can say they watched 100% of the video, so they should at least get 3 out of 5, and maybe give them some points for getting the questions correct over here as well. Is that more of what you're looking for or something else?
Yeah, that's great. Can you also explain what that little arrow, the double arrow, like the refresh arrow on that side, what can you do with that? Because I think this is really cool when we're talking about, are we teaching so students just have one shot, or what does that little refresh arrow do?
So what's great about this is, and I'll show you kind of what I do later with my Schoology page for students, is that students can actually, if I can see that they really struggle with the video, but they want to get a better grade, is I can actually reset their progress, as you can see I'm going to do here for Jillian again. And so I can reset the progress, and that student, it's like as if they never watched the video. So they can rewatch the video again and to get that additional practice on something they maybe struggle with the first time through. Or if they want to review for a test or a quiz, I can reset all of their progress and say, hey, our quiz is on transformation of functions tomorrow. Go back and watch that video and see how much of it you remember. Answer the questions and see what you can do. And then I can get a better gauge of how they're actually doing in my class, maybe the second time around.
So this is a cool example of how Corey, I think it's cool, how you're using this formative assessment quick before class. And I love what you said about looking at the 3 questions. So now this flipped classroom isn't just about changing so that the work in the class is more activated. It's really helping him differentiate. So he looks at those 4 questions, those 3 questions, and it was clear that one of them needed, you know, a quick whole class review. But then the other time in class, now he can send some kids off to work on starting this project, and he can help support those 3 or 4 kids who really didn't get it. They can check in and review things more in depth. So you're not reviewing for everyone. You're not boring some kids. Have you ever, Corey, used the kids who did really well? Like, were you able to use this to help group kids up into helping each other think through the problems?
Yeah, I had a couple of rockstar students in this pre-calculus class that I would use as sort of teacher guides, or, you know, if it was a situation where if I go back to this and maybe a majority of them were in the yellow or the red, and I had a couple students who were in the green, I can maybe kind of have small sessions where I'd ask them to kind of lead and go over the questions to make sure that they could help. So if you were kind of watching the screen as Darcy was talking, you can see here that this first question was rough. I mean, about half of the students got it right. So that tells me that I need to go over this, but I might look in here and see that who answered the question correctly. And here are the people who answered the question correctly. And maybe I might call in a couple of those students to help me out and to go ahead and explain it to the class. What's great about this too, and I don't know if I can't see if I have feedback on these, but I can try to get feedback on these as well. And so maybe I can identify that, okay, most people have the misconception about this one where they, you know, in the vertical flip over the x-axis, a horizontal shrink of 3. And then a lot of people thought it went to the right instead of the left. And so I can clear that up, or I can have my students, I can maybe kind of coach them before the class and say, hey, you know, would you be willing to explain this, and especially this part? I'm not sure how often I do that. I couldn't get you like a, you know, all of us who are teachers out there know that it's kind of hard sometimes to be that on top of it every day. But there are times where I've had students help me out in that situation.
I appreciate that, because that's an important factor too, to remember that this doesn't mean that Corey was looking at this data every single day, but it's
Right.
here. And so you can use it for some of those things. I think that I love that list of here very quickly. Here's that list of all the kids who answered the question correctly. I can think of many times where with an English concept, where if a student isn't understanding how I have explained something, I will frequently say to them, you know what, I'm sorry, I'm not explaining this in a way that your brain is connecting. So I don't have any other ways of explaining this, but you know what, so-and-so understands it, and she might have a way of explaining it to you that makes more sense than the way I'm explaining it. And I really try to emphasize that fault is not with the student. And here's where I think, like, part of this, what Corey was saying with being able to send comments is also pretty cool. I think by the time they get to us in high school, my experience is a lot of kids just feel like there's a right answer or a wrong answer. And as a high school English teacher, I have frequently envied that black and white distinction in math teachers. But what's been great with collaborating with Corey on this is seeing him talk about the fact that there's gray area in math too, where a kid clearly gets the concept, but they flipped one part, or they misread that one bracket, like he pointed out. So I like the idea that we can also have these conversations with students where we can acknowledge to them, 75% of your thinking is accurate. here's the mistake that you're making, and really focusing on that fact that this is a learning process. And the downside is flipped. The Edpuzzle analytics still aren't quite so sophisticated. It's still just going to come up as a wrong answer for them. But that's where those feedback comments are so cool, because then you can clarify for a student of, this is wrong, but you are so close. Like, you're on the right track. And it looks like Corey's pulled up another thing for that.
Right, and so you can see here that to get to this page, just to show you how I got here, I was back on this, the student progress page, and up here it says grade. I had 25 things to grade. And so you go here, and I had an open-ended question. You can see here that each student had given their response in so many words as what they thought the vertical line test was for. And so Brendan was very enlightening that the vertical line test is for a vertical line. So obviously not really the greatest response ever. So I can add a comment about that and let them know that, that's not really what I was looking for. And then this student determine whether it is a function. That's great. And so a comment I might add there to say that, yep, you're there. How do we know? Could you explain when the vertical line test fails or passes, et cetera? And you can basically give feedback to each of these students. And that's what Darcy was talking about, where, a student could be very close. You just kind of need to nudge them in that direction. And this is just about as good as the written feedback that you put on a piece of paper that they turn in. It's here forever. It's easy to see. They can go back and maybe read what I had written to them right before their test. Like, okay, I need to remember, this is what Mr. Lovelace said before the test about this topic. If you go in here, some students, I asked them approximating local maximums or minimums. And so I could see here what they write down and kind of give them feedback on, you're kind of close, or you switch the X's and Y's around, et cetera. But if you're not a math person, this is great if you're doing an English video and you ask them to summarize maybe one of the rules of grammar that they learned about, or maybe the type of character that you're reading about, or the story arc, or whatever your subject happens to be. Having open-ended questions like this allows you to go through and grade at full here, and you can kind of give them a grade here. You can set what this checkbox does. If this is like the yes or no, you can make it sort of a binary response where they get all the points or none of the points. Or you can click inside here and say, yeah, you're 77% there. And that's sort of what happens. Matt had asked a question, or Matthew had asked a question about whether when they rewatch the video, do they get a new grade or do you have to reset it? And if I remember correctly, it's been a couple of years since I was doing this full time, because I've since moved to Schoology, is that you have to hit this reset button every time they'd like to get a new grade. And so it kind of was nice in the sense that if they wanted to get a better grade, they kind of had to talk to me about it and, take the initiative to say, hey, I'd like to rewatch this video again for a better grade. Would you reset my progress so far? And I could absolutely do that for you. And I guess before I move on to Schoology, are there any other questions about using Edpuzzle's analytics or the video stuff? And I should preface this saying that we're going to look at other screencasting or recording tools later.
Yeah. Corey's going to share a little bit about Schoology. So if you don't like Edpuzzle, or for whatever reason, you're like, that's another account, you don't want that, you can accomplish this same thing. If you already are a Google Classroom, you can do this right in Google Forms. You can embed YouTube videos directly from YouTube into Google Forms and then have your formative assessment questions. So you don't have to use Edpuzzle. A lot of these resources are out there in other ways. I really like the fact that you can edit, you can add all those questions, it stops the video. But if you're looking for another way of curating them, West Fargo a couple years ago went to Schoology as kind of the web management system. So instead of having teacher web pages or SharePoint pages, they went to Schoology. And Schoology is available for individual teacher accounts. If you already have a Google Classroom account, there's really no advantage to having a Schoology account. But Corey just wanted to share quickly that he is doing the same thing. Like if Edpuzzle just isn't jamming for you, if for whatever reason you don't like it, he was just going to show quickly how you can, still edit videos in Edpuzzle and then share them in a different platform other than Google Classroom. Or you can just do the videos right in Schoology is another option.
So if you can see here how I got here, I've had a couple of videos that I've used in my algebra class this year. I've recorded them separately, then uploaded them into Edpuzzle. And I can click here, like this lesson 1 video, and if I don't want to do this in Edpuzzle, and you can see here that I have, the questions already embedded in them, I can assign and share. Now, if I don't want to assign it to a pre-made class like my pre-calculus or my algebra, I can go share with anyone. There's a link and an embed code. And so for Schoology, what I've been doing is I've been clicking this embed code and copying it, just hitting Control-C or right-click and copy. And then I would go to Schoology here. And here's my Schoology course. I'm not going to go into this really in depth, but I can go to my algebra class and I can, add an assignment. And for me, they turn into tests or quizzes. But the reason I use Schoology is it kicks right back to my PowerSchool gradebook. So when I grade in Schoology, it grades in my gradebook. So I could give a title to this video. I can make it worth a certain number of points in the gradebook. I can see what category I want that to be in the gradebook, and I can create it. And so when that happens, I can add questions, and I can add, from a question bank, because I do this quite often. And I've created pre-made questions that I have for basically every video I make. And I know that I'm going really fast, and that's just not the point of what I'm trying to share with you. You don't need to know all of the minutia of this, but the long story short version of this is I have these pre-made questions for every single one. I want them to write a brief summary of what they've learned, my expectations on there, then write 1 or 2 questions, use vocabulary from the videos. So if I want to use an Edpuzzle video in this particular question, I can hit edit. And using that embed code I just got from that Edpuzzle site, I can insert media here from the web, and the embed code goes here, and now it's in there. And so now I have a rubric here attached to let students know what I'm going to grade them on. So you can see here I have point values for how they perform, just to let them know how they earn all 8 points for that particular question. And so now it's like this. This is what they will see. And look, it says Edpuzzle right in the video. The questions are embedded in there. And so wherever you host your flipped classroom, whether you decide to do it in your Google Classroom, in Edpuzzle, or in something like Schoology, you can post the Edpuzzle video with a question. Here's what happens. I'm going to mute this so you don't hear me talking twice. I already don't like to hear myself speak. I'm sure that's a lot of us on this call. But let's see if I can get to that point in the video where the question is. And so you can see, it's going to play a little bit here. You can see me writing in minuscule font. Super readable. This is exciting, especially for non-math people. See if I can zoom along in there. Oh, I missed it. Shoot, I can't quite get there, but if you click on there, the question will show up. It'll ask you what the radicand is, and I want to assess whether students know what a radicand is. And so you see I've placed some strategic answers. I have 450 in there. That's the correct answer. At least it should be. I made a typo. It looks like, oops. 3 should be the index, which is, saying that if I click that answer and hit submit, I have feedback in there, like, good, that's the right answer, even though it's not. Sorry, math people. Then this is a common mistake I hear people or see people have tried to do in the past, is divide the radicand by the index, get 150. And I say that, don't do that. And I say, nope, that's wrong. This one was the index. And they can rewatch the video or continue along and try again later. So it's great. I mean, these Edpuzzle videos, even if you're hosting outside of Edpuzzle, are a really great tool to have for a flipped classroom.
So I'm going to take back the camera a little bit here because I want to show you one last tool, oh so briefly. There are a lot of free online editing things. I've tested several of them, and I highly recommend Screencast-o-matic. It's simple. It doesn't have a ton of bells and whistles, but I do think that overall, it's just really the easiest. So I go to Screencast-o-matic. I'm in my account. I click Start the Recorder, and it will prompt me to open the screen recorder. And you can see that it's launching. And what will come up is a little box. And I like Screencast-o-matic for 2 main reasons. The first reason is that it allows you to, here you go, it allows you to record in segments. So you can see my record box. So if you couldn't find the video that you wanted online, it just wasn't anywhere, you can record your own. So you can see this is showing me the field of where it's going to be recorded. So I can line that up. You hit record, it'll give you a countdown. I can record that today we're going to talk about Edpuzzle, and I'm going to give you the overview of some basics of how to use this tech tool. Unlike many of the other ones, you have to just record continuously. So now you can record and you can switch tabs and you can go somewhere else, and then you can record again. And so you would just hit record again. Now I'm going to record the second little chunk, and then I say something ridiculous and I sneeze, and then, oh, someone walks into my classroom. I pause. This was the other reason why I really like Screencast-o-matic. The other ones that I found didn't, the free ones didn't do this. You can record over the most recent chunk. So if someone did walk into my classroom, or I sneezed, or something else happened, or I swore and said something that I really shouldn't say, you can hit this back arrow and it will go back one recorded chunk. And then, yes, I want to truncate that. And now I can re-record my second little bit without having to go back to the beginning and re-record my entire little lesson. I can restart right from that moment. When I'm done, I hit done. Many of the other options only allowed me, like the free Google Chrome recorder, which is a nice recorder. It only allows you to save to YouTube. This one you can save directly as an MP4 file to your desktop. You can turn off the cursor. Like if you were showing kids things with your cursor, you can turn that on or off. When you hit publish, it will take a little bit of time. It will save that file for you. And it's going to just show up on my desktop because that's where I told it to save. And then we can see this little recording down here. Now I have this little video. I can record that today we're going to talk about Edpuzzle. So I have this little video, and here's the other reason why. Again, I do sound like a commercial for Edpuzzle. I apologize. Under my content in Edpuzzle, under Create, I can upload a video. So I can take that video from my desktop. I can take that little recording and I can open it here in Edpuzzle. And now I can do exactly to this video everything. It's the little leprechauns are preparing the video. But I can do everything to this video that I could do to any of the Edpuzzle videos. So if you combine those two tools, now you using Screencast-o-matic, and I apologize that that was so short, but that's honestly the main things about doing this. And yes, I love Stephanie's has a nice little add-in. If you already have PowerPoints created, you can record in PowerPoint by downloading the Mix add-in. So you don't need Screencast-o-matic. You can just do it right in PowerPoint and record that. If you want to take your students to different things, you're wanting like to show them a website, you're wanting to show them a few different things, you can use something like Screencast-o-matic. But Steph's right. You already have this tool right in your PowerPoint. You can record that and you can still upload it to Edpuzzle. So like I've said, the main reason why I like the Edpuzzle is now I can add in these formative assessments. So for this one, this question about quick guide to quoting, I have these different questions that are in there, and I can have my questions for the students, and then they have to answer. So it takes my Screencast-o-matic video up that notch. So now I'm not just flipping my classroom, I'm adding in a formative assessment that helps me check for student comprehension and will allow me, when students come, I have this video on how to embed quotes. Students can watch that. I can look at those analytics and see that they don't need any more, or that they have completely lost the ball. In general, when you start doing the flip, and one of the things that's challenging is you do need to commit to it. You need to commit to the flip. If students start seeing that you are willing to reteach everything in class to the whole class, you're going to set up a situation where there's no reason for them to watch the video because you're just reteaching it in class anyway. So there's a really fine line, and I know we wrestle with those questions every day as teachers, but there is that fine line that when you're flipping, you do need to commit to the flip. So I've talked to a lot of different teachers, and you can share those in the chat box. Some teachers have a little bit of built-in class time at the end of a class so that those students who either have a game that night, they're busy, maybe they don't have internet at home, that teachers try to make sure that they build in a little bit of time in class so students could potentially watch the next video. That's tough. Easier is to make sure that your classroom is available as much as possible and troubleshoot with students. How can they access this video? How can you make sure that they can get this video? Because if your students can't get it, if they can't access it, it's not really helping anything. And if you end up just reteaching it the next day because kids didn't watch it, you're in a negative feedback loop. And now the flip is never going to work. So you do want to make sure you're being strategic. Take those steps as you're talking about flipping. Explain that to your students. As I shared before, do the first video live in class. Walk them through the steps. Then for the next video, assign it to all of them, but maybe give them time right in class to watch it. Practice with their phones, practice with a computer so that they understand how to navigate everything. And then maybe by the third thing, then you can just assign them the video. That's all like a long way of saying, though, you also know your students. I know I've had classes where I feel like I could have just flipped to flipped classroom very quickly and they would have been fine. And I've had other cohorts where it would not have gone very well if I had just done it automatically without some instruction and without some scaffolding of support. So we're at our hour. If you have questions or if you have different ideas, I did want to throw out one thing Corey and I didn't get to talk about today, but is another huge benefit for flipped classroom. Think about your athletes. Think about kids that go on family vacations. Anyone who has a doctor's appointment, any of those things that come up constantly with kids being gone, and we're gearing up to spring sport season where you have spring athletes gone constantly, particularly those later hours of the day. There is a cool advantage of doing the flip that you know that they can watch and they can access some of that information and still be progressing with the unit, even though they're not in class. Edpuzzle is free. You will see in Edpuzzle, it will say things, let me close out of this. It will give you this thing that says 10 free lessons. You have 10 free lessons. That's simply in this share feature. You can share lessons that you've created with other people, but on the free account, you can only do that 10 times. So under the search, you can also, there's this school option. So if your school chooses to have an Edpuzzle account, your whole school can share content. So if you were in a larger school where you do have an English department, you could split up taking different topics and making these videos, you would have one general ELA folder. All the teachers could share their videos to this folder, and now any teacher in your school can use them. That feature you need to pay for. To have your own personal account is completely free. That's one of the reasons why it blows my mind, and I love it so much. So you can share 10 lessons for free, but don't let this throw you. This isn't your personal account that you only have 10 free lessons. Your personal account, unlimited lessons. But if you want to be able to share things with other colleagues and be able to collaborate, you only get 10 free lessons that you can share. And then that's how they're making some money and able to provide all of this for a resource. Screencast-o-matic is also free. You're limited to 15-minute videos on the free version of Screencast-o-matic, which is actually perfect because we know from developmental research that 15 minutes is really about the cap for student learning anyway. So Screencast-o-matic the free version has a nice built-in endpoint where you can't go past that free version. And I just realized that I was showing all of that, but I wasn't sharing my screen. So here's what this looks like. The My School has different folders. So you will see this 10 lessons left. Again, that's just for the school account of you being able to share. So if that's something that you think would be of value, I have no idea how expensive it is. But I believe that good teacher resources should be free, and this is. As Corey clarified, I think there are lots of different ways to share. So if you're not in Google, you can share that link any way that you want. Like I said, I love Remind. If you're not on Remind, I encourage you to check that out because it texts everything to kids' phones. So I really like Remind as another free tech tool, and parents can sign in, and all they need to do is text a code, and then their phone number is in your class. So anything you text to that class goes to everyone who's registered to that class. So that would be another option for sharing out your Edpuzzle videos, is to throw the link into Remind and hit send. And then that will send it to everyone who's subscribed to your page. Other questions? That was a lot of information in just over an hour. Your troopers, thanks for staying with it as we did go over a little bit. So I appreciate you hanging in there. If you have other questions or if you need extra support, feel free to email me anytime. I'm happy to go through this with you over the phone. I'm also, if you think that this is something that your colleagues would benefit from, I am paid for, I am fully grant funded, and I am available for any school to do webinars or supports sessions completely for free. So if you think that this would be helpful, let me know and we can set up a time for me to visit you at your school in person. And Corey, the good heart that he is, he threw his email address in our chat link. So as a teacher who is fully flipped, because I'm a teacher who did a little bit of flip. I made a couple videos and I did a couple little things. So I can share the technology side. But if you want some tips from a teacher who's gone full flip, he shared his email there in the resource link. So feel free to give him a shout out as well. So thanks everyone for joining us today. I hope this was somewhat helpful. I'm going to email those of you who attended a little survey. So give me some feedback on how to make this webinar series more helpful to you. And if you have questions or suggestions for different webinar topics that you would like to see, please email me. I would love to help make videos and webinars and bring resources to you that appeal to you. So thanks everybody, and we'll sign out.